Hi, I'm Robin DeRosa. I'm the Director of Learning and Libraries at Plymouth State University, and I am coming to you from Providence, Rhode Island at the 2024 Open Education Conference. I am taking a page in this talk from young climate activist Greta Thunberg. How dare you pretend that this can be solved with just business as usual and some technical solutions, she said in an inspiring speech to the UN in 2019. As you are probably aware, there is a global climate crisis. And this climate crisis is perpetuated, exacerbated, caused, choose your verb, mostly by corporate polluters. 100 active fossil fuel producers are linked to 71% of global industrial greenhouse gases since 1988. And over half of global industrial emissions since 1988 can be traced to just 25 corporate and state producers. For all of the information and sources for this talk, I encourage you to click on the slide deck that is linked next to this recording. At the Google slide deck, you can borrow all of these slides or search the notes for source material. You may know this ad. It is problematically called the Crying Indian ad from the 70s. I used to see this almost every day after school in watching after school TV. This ad portrays a Native American supposedly in traditional dress, canoeing down a polluted river. And when he pulls up on the shore, somebody driving by in a car throws some litter at his feet. And you see a single tear roll down his face. Obviously, an example of the noble savage stereotype and a lot of primitivism at work in this ad. All of which I think is directly linked to the larger point, which is that this ad was paid for by a campaign called Keep America Beautiful, which was made up of a group of leaders from packaging companies like the American Can Company. And these companies not only lobbied for anti-littering or produced anti-littering propaganda, but also lobbied against bottle bills and legislation that would have required packaging to be returnable or recyclable rather than disposable. So what we see is a shunting of blame onto individual bad actors, particularly consumers, and the blame being pushed away from the corporate polluters who are actually at the core of what is now a significant climate crisis. I'm not going to show the whole video there, but it is embedded into the slide deck, so you can watch it when you have the stomach for it. Greta Thunberg has been making more and more connections in her recent activism between the climate crisis and larger, broader themes of exploitation. Here is a mastodon toot. It's been said before, but the second Greta started making connections between climate change and capitalism, colonialism, and imperialism, the media coverage came to a screeching halt. I would suggest it's actually been worse than a screeching halt. Instead, what we start seeing is Thunberg getting attacked by pundits and bloggers like Ian Leslie. Here's a quote. No longer special by virtue of her age, Thunberg has become just another activist ranting about Palestine and capitalism, albeit one with millions of social media followers. That's a shame, since she clearly has brains, charisma, and courage. In this post, which is called How the World Failed Greta Thunberg, the failure is actually the fact, according to Leslie, that the world indulged a teenager as opposed to teaching the teenager the hard truths of how to grow up as an activist, and instead produced somebody who basically became a whiner against capitalist and exploitive systems. I would say that is not the way in which the world has failed Greta Thunberg. But I was so interested in the sort of gut punch that I felt when I started seeing Thunberg's activism expand, and the way that that quickly sort of shut down the admiration that the media and culture had for the work that she was doing. Um, I want to turn and make a connection here to Open Ed and go back to Open Ed 15, which was in Vancouver. And it was also a real turning point for me in my own work in open education. I blogged during that conference, and I wrote a blog called Open Textbooks UGG. I think it was the first time anybody ever read anything I wrote, besides maybe a teacher before. And a lot of people were interested in the argument I was making, which was that open education needed to focus on pedagogy rather than the artifacts of textbooks, because pedagogy was where we were going to really make radical transformation. And at the risk of being completely offensive, I am going to now quote myself. I am calling for a radical pedagogy caucus, to move my image here, a core self-identified group committed to placing pedagogy at the center of the open education movement. Great. That was a younger and fresher me. And I was inspired to follow my own advice. And I think I followed it well, and I followed it into territories that really excited me and colleagues of mine. I am the Director of Learning in Libraries now at Plymouth State University, where I started just as a faculty member, first as an adjunct, then a contract faculty member, and finally, luckily, as a tenure track professor, which is not a journey that is easy to make anymore. But at Plymouth State, I led an effort to transform the sort of brand of our pedagogy at the college around something that we now call cluster learning. And cluster learning focuses on interdisciplinarity, project-based learning, and open education. We actually institutionally at our public regional university in New Hampshire placed open education at the center of all of our innovation as a higher ed institution. In the meantime, we also focused on OER and textbook savings. And so far, we've saved over $2 million, which is an exorbitantly high amount of money, given how small we are, how few faculty we have, and we are just a small rural university. So this is big news. And I was really excited by the fact that the textbook savings were not what we led with. We led with pedagogical transformation, with the idea of the knowledge commons being democratized, bringing our student voices into the creation of learning materials, and really thinking about how open our infrastructures for learning could transform the educational process. It was a really heady and exciting time, and as a youngish but sort of approaching mid-career professor, it inspired me to think in new ways about teaching and learning, which is responsible, I think, for my whole trajectory in my career. But that, my friends, was a long, long, long time ago. And I am coming to you now after having what look like great successes, both institutionally and also consulting with over 100 institutions from all over the world, Canada, Africa, the United States, and more. I do not feel as proud as I used to feel about the work that I and my colleagues have done in open education. And I want to explain that by talking about the library that I now direct. It's called Lamson Learning Commons. It's the library at Plymouth State University, again, in New Hampshire. About a handful of years ago, between 5 and 8, we had a faculty and staff of 17. We were a small group, but it was a lively, busy library. We had about 12 librarians working. We had an OER librarian for quite a while, and all all good things, and just really, really wonderful people, some of whom are still there functioning in the library. I myself have been at Plymouth State for 25 years. So it's my institution. It's also my home. And I'm really, really proud of this school and this community. But under my directorship, Lamson has contracted to 3 librarians, and within a couple of weeks now, like virtually no staff. We will be rebuilding a bit, but there's no other way to say it except that we have been decimated. And that unfortunately is not just the library. That is my entire institution, which has been there since the 1830s, serving rural New Hampshire's population as a public institution, but is now in danger of being either consolidated or closed. We have lost many majors. We have lost many faculty. We no longer hire tenure track faculty at all. And certain, I'm talking about, yes, the philosophy major, the things people are like, yes, well, of course, philosophy, but I'm also talking about history. I'm talking about math. I'm talking about central programs that our students are no longer able to major in. And what's been most disturbing is as we have had the success that we've had in open education, it has not prevented us from watching our institution dissolve right from underneath us. And what I want to talk about today are some of the messages that we are getting more broadly in higher education and why we need to start talking about those, maybe even instead of talking about open. Some of those messages: we need to cut institutional spending. Public funding is never returning. The liberal arts are dying. Universities are rigid and outdated. Teaching has given way to indoctrination, and colleges should prepare the workforce. I am coming from a US perspective, but I just participated in a book called Higher Ed for Good. And that was a global effort, people from many, many countries. And I wrote the first chapter of that book with a focus globally on how these trends are affecting post-secondary education. So I think in many ways we are in the same boat. Some of the things we might hear, particularly where I am in the northeast of the US now, we're hearing there's a demographic cliff. There's a skills gap. We need more STEM majors. We have a knowledge economy. Automation and AI are changing everything. Tenure is antiquated. It's un-American. I think what concerns me is the way that many of us, regardless of where we sit in higher education or what our investments are in open, tend to accept the terms of these debates because we feel that we need to prove that we have solutions to these issues. Otherwise, we feel that we are going to simply be eliminated from higher education. But one of the questions that I have been having lately is who sets the terms of these debates and where is the data coming from? So in particular, how is the data being shaped in order to affect a certain narrative and affect a certain narrative that serves a certain interest group? It is not neutral. The data is not neutral. I have really learned a lot from the book, The Fantasy Economy by Neil Krauss. And he really digs in, he's an economist, and he digs into the data that really suggests that some of the sources that we have been using and trusting in higher education to tell us what the problems are, that these are really polluted sources that are constructed to serve a particular interest. And basically what I'll say is corporate interest. And instead, if we use public data, if we use official data from places like the National Center for Education Statistics, for example, we do not see the terms of the debate as they have been laid out. So for example, Krauss proves, and you can look at the page numbers here if you want to go refer, that the labor market is not becoming more specialized or technical. We do not have an emerging knowledge economy, at least not according to the data. Official data has never supported the existence of a skills gap. The skills gap argument, as it was growing, there were official reports being released and obscured that showed that the nation was actually overproducing scientists and engineers as opposed to not producing enough and having the skills gap. We are not seeing a decline in math and reading scores on standardized tests, so we do not see declining achievement, or in particular in the US, you'll hear declining American achievement. We can't compete, particularly in math. We are seeing that 25 to 40% of workers with bachelor's degrees are in jobs that do not require a college degree. So in many ways, what our graduates are finding is that they are overeducated and overqualified for a broken labor market. American universities graduate 2 to 3 times more STEM majors as jobs are available in those fields, which is a lot of surprise to the humanists who keep being told that our majors can't get jobs. The Government Accountability Office's report on workplace automation found that there's no existing data that proves that job loss in any fields is due to automation. And the NCES projected that higher education enrollments would be relatively constant throughout the 2020s, with very slight increases projected by 2030. And that's just a slap in the face to Nathan Graw and the demographic cliff. My point is, when I was reading The Fantasy Economy, I was shocked and horrified to notice the ways that I had just absorbed and accepted that these were what was broken in education and in the economy, and that my job as a faculty member was in part to fix education so that it could solve some of these problems. This, my friends, is what we should call a neoliberal grift. And no one loves the word neoliberal. In fact, it's part of the reason we don't talk about it is because when you raise that word, people go, oh God, that's jargon. It's horrible. It's terrible. Yeah, we need to be comfortable with this word. It's not a scary word. It's not even that many syllables. We can say it because what it represents is in fact a thing that is killing us all. So just a way of sort of shorthanding what we're talking about when we're talking about neoliberalism, the efficiency of the free market, right? A sort of trust that the efficiency of the free market is the way to go. It's the general overarching organizational principle that things should be deregulated and privatized, including public sector goods and tools and processes. The markets require that kind of privatization, and all things should be deregulated and privatized. Taxes, it is a universal good that taxes should be reduced. And anytime you can have a tax cut, you should. There's an abandonment of the welfare state. Even the phrase the welfare state is a phrase that gets maligned. And we replace the notion of the public good with a personal responsibility for one's own welfare. The idea here really is that education is broken. So if we can just fix it, we can get all sorts of things. We can get a healthy workforce, economic and social justice, American strength, or, you know, whatever country you are from, right? A sort of sense of national pride and national strength because we will be able to compete. And sustainable universities that will be able to function because they are generating what they need to succeed. What we don't discuss when we are focusing so much on what education can and should do are other factors that are actually the controlling factors of the things that education is blamed for. Things like the domination of low-wage, low-education jobs, stagnating minimum wage, the gig economy, contract workers, we know all about that in education, monopolies, union busting, deregulation, taxation, privatization, and certainly we do not discuss fascism. I think the fascism piece is a much, much larger piece that I spend a lot more time on in this other piece that I've written recently. But Richard Sandberg suggests it's not so much that members of the plutocracy subscribe to fascist values. It's a matter of convenience. How do they divide and rule the angry majority, the people? If we have a purported democracy, right? How is the plutocracy going to control the people? So they are tempted, when challenged, to ally with far-right populist leaders who hold sway over mass constituency. This is the rise of Trump in the United States. It's the rise of the extreme right globally and fascism globally, not just in the US with Trumpism. And all of this is connected to this capitalist neoliberal framework that constrains us all in the work that we are doing. What we end up with is an entire neoliberal university where all of the aspects of our work, both in teaching and learning and in just the sort of, running of our infrastructures from our IT and cybersecurity to our purchasing and our HR platforms and everything else. The way that we pay for things, the way that our students pay for things, the way that we publish, the way that we get our learning materials, all of this stuff gets wrapped up in this neoliberal framework. And here in open education, we hope that we are able to flip various parts of these circles from the neoliberal to what I might call the public. But we tend to look at very specific pieces. We tend to look at, open technologies and platforms, or we look at social justice in our learning materials, or we look at the pedagogy of inquiry. All of these things are important, as are the costs of learning materials versus commercial textbooks. But the problem is still at the core, if we don't transform these neoliberal structures and frameworks into something that is more public, we're just going to be eating around the edges of this toxic system. That's why someone like me can make real progress with open education, with OER, and with pedagogy, some of which I would have called radical pedagogy. And I can still see my entire institution in danger of being lost. And my institution is not a haven, right? If you teach at a land grant institution, the land that was granted was tribal land, right? That was taken from Native peoples all the way back to the core. We've got exploitation of marginalized groups at the center of our educational systems. But the direction in which we are moving now is not a direction towards blowing everything up and creating something that's truly just. It is in the opposite direction, as we are careening more and more to systems that only serve private interest and the wealthy. And I'm starting to see open education as a way of putting my finger in a very large, gaping wound and feeling sort of, good about that. But I feel less and less good every day. I feel like OER and open pedagogy are hope-based concepts that help educators deflect small, though truly painful, economically and socially violent attacks against marginalized learners who are trying to survive the educational system under neoliberalism. But I do not have any hope that OER, or even much hope that open pedagogy, can create radical or systemic change. At their worst, they can prop up a violent system by highlighting the heroic efforts to plug the dam. But just downriver unnoticed, a tidal wave is gathering force. If economic growth is our only priority, then what we are experiencing now should be exactly what we should be expecting, said Greta Thunberg in 2022. I'm deeply concerned about the climate crisis, I'm deeply concerned about where education is headed. But all of these things, I think what I'm most concerned about is that we fail to honestly talk about the neoliberal, white supremacist, capitalist framework that is taking every small good effort that we make and turning it against us. And I don't think that there's any way that we can keep ignoring the incoming tidal wave. And even though it is uncomfortable because we are going to be demeaned, the way that Thunberg has been demeaned, when we take the risk to talk back against these systems, I think we need to be doing that before, during, and after any other attempts we make to focus on OER, open pedagogy, open education, or equity in higher education. Thank you.